I'm just going to take you live to Melbourne. We've got the State Memorial Service being held for the Honourable John Landy. He was Governor of Victoria, superb athlete as well, once held the 1500-metre world record and, of course, famously stopped to help Ron Clarke in a race in Melbourne. During the race when Ron Clarke fell over and John Landy went on to win the race and really typified him as an athlete, as a person. This is marathon runner Steve Moneghetti at this service. Let's have a listen in.
Which caused him to fall, and as a result, John was forced to leap over Ron, but on the way he grazed Ron's arms with his spikes. On instinct, John stopped, and as other runners passed by, he ran back to see if Ron was okay, and to apologise for spiking him, as only John would. Ron assured John that he was all right, and with that, John looked up, and with Clarkey urging him on, he set out after the rest of the field. There was about a lap and a half to go, and by the bell he was absolutely flying, and by some sort of miracle he not only caught back up to the field, but passed them all to go on and win the race. He had surely lost a large chunk of time in his selfless deed, and he still ran an amazing 4 minutes, 4.2 seconds. It is widely believed that he would have broken the world record that day. What he did do was enter sporting immortality by his show of unparalleled sportsmanship. To quote the late, great Harry Gordon, "Yours was a classic sporting gesture. It was a senseless piece of chivalry, but it will be remembered as one of the finest actions in the history of sport. In a nutshell, you sacrificed your own chance of a world record to go to the aid of a fallen rival. And in pulling up, trotting back to Ron Clarke, muttering sorry and deciding to chase the field, you achieved much more than any world record." There is a sculpture on Olympic Boulevard called simply Sportsmanship to commemorate the occasion, and Harry Gordon's open letter to John, which appeared in the Sun News pictorial the next day, sits at the base of Mitchell's work. I grew up in awe of that moment in sport, and I was chock full of emotion the first time I met John Landy, knowing that it was this very human being who had taught me the meaning of sportsmanship and the life lessons that sport provides, which often do not occur in other aspects of our existence. Secondly, there was the chase to break the 4-minute mile, a feat that was considered impossible to achieve by the human species. It was truly an international race with American Wes Santee, Englishman Roger Bannister and our John Landy all closing in on the mystical mark in 1954. We all know that Bannister got there first with his paced race result of 3:59.4 at Oxford in England on May 6th. Just 6 weeks later, in an official race in Turku, Finland, John broke 4 minutes and Bannister's time when he ran 3:57.9, 3:58 rounded up as they did in those days, also breaking the 1500-metre world record on the way through, running 3:41.8 seconds. The rivalry led to what is commonly referred to as the Mile of the Century between the two at the Vancouver British Empire and Commonwealth Games, with Bannister prevailing after a valiant display of front running from John. We won't mention that look behind. With history's only two sub-4-minute milers at that time, both running under 4 minutes. But for all his athletics pursuits, it's the person that he was that we most admire about John. Let me remind you of the thoughts of some of his contemporaries and friends. Pat Clohessy: "Here was I, a kid from the country, and John Landy was taking the time to write to me?" And a few years later, Pat remarked, "John Landy not only climbed the mountain himself, but he encouraged, inspired, even assisted others who sought his advice." And Len Johnson again: "If you would trek the difficult path from Australia to the top in world athletics, what better role model could you have than John Landy?" And Steve Bracks: "Steve, when you were Premier, on the appointment of John as Governor of Victoria, talking about that mile championship, you said he still believes that what he did in that race didn't warrant a fuss. That's what makes him special." Paul O'Neill, writing for Sports Illustrated in 1956, summed John up so well: "Landy is a complex human, an intellectual with a compulsion for the arena and a stoic disregard for pain and exhaustion, a reserved and sensitive man whose mind is repelled, but whose kindred spirits are kindled by the roar of the applause and the incandescent glare of publicity. Cathy Freeman, I'm saddened to learn of the passing of a giant of a man, John Landy, a true athlete, scholar and gentleman. And from Rob de Castella, a role model, an inspiration and always a gentleman. Finally, from great friend Marjorie Jackson Nelson, John and I first met through athletics and our friendship spanned over 70 years. Who would forget the great sporting moment when he went back to help a fallen Ron Clarke in a race and then went on to win? That was the sort of person he was. He had a mischievous side to him. Flying back from London to Helsinki to pick up the Australian team to take them home, he grabbed my team hat from me and he wouldn't give it back. Imagine my surprise nearly 40 years later when he called me to tell me that he still had my hat and he was ready to return it. I just told him to donate it to a museum. Another great highlight for us both was being governors of our respective states at the same time. He in Victoria and I in South Australia. We had many chats over the years and bounced off various ideas with one another. Another highlight was both of us carrying the torch into the stadium for the 2006 Commonwealth Games in Melbourne. A member of the royal family personally told me that the highlight of the Games for Her Majesty was seeing two of her governors carrying the torch, which was presented to Her Majesty by John. John was like a brother to me, and his contribution to Australia in a variety of fields has left a legacy for future generations to refer to and be inspired by. Personally, my thoughts and love are with Lynn and their entire family, so many wonderful tributes to an incredible person. I was fortunate enough to meet John and Lynn several times, and John's humility was unmatched. But what I will always remember about John is that when you left his company, you always felt better about yourself. He had the uncanny ability to bring out your best qualities, just like when he raced and in life. We're all better for having had John Landy to lead us and show us the way. I watched a movie recently called It's a Wonderful Life, and they talked about when a bell rings that an angel in heaven gets their wings. Well, just like the sound of the bell signifying the last lap of a track race, the ringing of this bell this is for you, John. May those wings let you fly home to victory. We'll now view a selection of videos, photos and interviews collected by the Landy family, and this will be followed by the family reflection from Mr. Matthew Landy.
Steve Moneghetti paying tribute to fellow athlete John Landy, of course, fellow governor as well, Governor of Victoria. A man remembered for his sporting feats, but also sportsmanship, as exemplified by that story that Steve Moneghetti very timely, in a very timely manner, provided with us there. You can keep watching on channel 603, that State Memorial Service for John Landy.